come once again to discuss things.
Yeah.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
The Comics Kid 2099, aka Ruben DeBoard. Me.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh man. So, Ruben came up with our topic discussion, but before we get into that, I want to apologize to everyone for no episodes last week. It's been a crazy week. Anyway, Ruben, what are we discussing today?
Okay, so we are talking about, is it okay for a artist, and that includes like movie making, comic books, novels, is it okay for the artist to go back and change their work, alter it in any way, after it's out in the open for the audiences to see it? Do they lose a sense of ownership on that piece once it's out there? And I have some specific things in mind, but that was just just a sweet little summary of it.
Yeah, and I think I've got the definitive answer, and the answer is no, unless you're going to change guns into walkie-talkies. Okay, thanks everyone for watching. And Spielberg and Lucas are the ones that it's really hard to say anything about this on without just going straight to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of unfair because they were really bad at it. Like, you know, I'll give Lucas crap for the prequels like anyone else, but like, you know, he is a good director sometimes. Somewhere along the line, he was a good director. I don't know when it changed, but Lucas is a good director. Spielberg are good directors, and I can't help but feel like when they did it, they were just like kids in a candy store with new toys in digital technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just mucked it up because there was no rule book at the time, and they could just play with their franchises.
Yeah.
So like and the reason I say that is because I feel like the fact that they mucked it up so bad, not entirely. I don't hate every change Lucas did to Star Wars, for example, but the majority are not good to the point where it's almost not worth it. I think that, like, the fact that they mucked it up so badly when they did it back in the late 90s, early 2000s, has kind of left a bad taste in our mouths just collectively upon why it's such a, just seen as such a bad thing now, at least in regard to film. And I think it's interesting because I don't necessarily hear this kind of discussion around much else outside of film.
Yeah, you don't hear about it a lot with novels. I was thinking of Stephen King. He wrote The Stand, which I think is his longest book. And apparently in the first edition of the book, there's one point a character mentions Howard the Duck, the comic book, and then apparently there was a later edit where he changed it to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it's such a minor edit. I don't know why he would go through the trouble of doing that. And I haven't read either version of the book, but the only difference I can think of is if it was a contemporary reference, Howard the Duck was going on in the late 70s, early 80s, and then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles hit it huge in the early 90s. So, like, I don't know why you would make that change, but like, you don't, other than that, I don't ever hear about it with novels very often. You know, recently DC put out Batman the Damned, and it was
Damned.
Oh, I'm sorry. Batman Damned, and I haven't read it, but I think everyone under the planet has heard about it. You get to see Batman's penis, and only if you bought the first printing, because apparently later versions of this comic will not show it. And I have no
Cowards.
strong I have no strong feelings on Batman's penis.
Very
but
many strong feelings on Batman's penis.
I thought it
I'm gonna
was
go with that.
I thought it was funny. When I heard about it, I was laughing. I'm a huge Batman fan. This didn't bother me. I'm like, okay, we see it. Like, I remember when Dark Knight 3 by Frank Miller came out, I'm pretty sure we got to see Wonder Woman bust out one of her breasts to breastfeed a baby. And I didn't think that was a big deal. Like, it happens. It's the human body. I don't know why DC is now saying we're going to put out later printings where we're going to like blur it out. I don't know. Like, to me, my feeling is don't do it. Like, if you're on the fence about something, like with the penis thing, like if editorial said, hey, this maybe isn't a bad idea, then maybe just don't even let them do it in the first place. Just tell Azzarello and Bermejo, no, don't do that.
Yeah, see, this is weird because these are two different discussions to a certain degree, but they are definitely connected in a lot of ways. Because one example with Lucas is the artist choosing to go back and the publisher, or studio in this case, allowing him to because it'll make them money. In the other case, the Bat Dong situation is inherently tied to the fact that it's a censorship issue at that point, because it's not Bermejo and Azzarello wanting to go back to do it. At least I don't think so. I don't think Bermejo has been like, people are turning my art into a joke, and so I just don't even want to deal with it, which would be more understandable, I guess. But I don't feel like that's the reaction that's happening. It's DC backpedaling, right? So one's censorship to go change a work, which is like, there's a fucking history of that. I forget if I've talked to you much about Sandman, but have you read all of Sandman?
Yes, but it's been a long time since I've read the whole series. But I have read like the first trade recently.
Okay, do you remember that story where it's him talking to the guy that his sister made immortal, and it's like they just keep having these meetings every 100 years?
Yeah, I really like that issue.
Yeah, it's my favorite issue of the series, actually. But like, in one of those meetings, they're talking about Shakespeare, and the old dude says, I saw a new production of Lear. They gave it a happy ending, the fools. And Morpheus says, oh, it'll revert back to the original. All the old stories always do. And so, like, but that was a real thing that happened. Like people change Shakespeare in history to give his plays happy endings. There is I'm sure I've heard of this. I don't have citations, so I'm sorry if I fucked it up or mixed something up in my head. But I'm reasonably sure there's a version of Romeo and Juliet that has a happy ending. And that's fucking bizarre when you think about it. But like, so like the idea of someone going back and changing a thing that wasn't involved in the original production of the art is definitely tangential to this conversation and definitely connected in some way, but I'm not sure if it's quite the same thing as the people involved going back and changing something about their art.
Yeah.
And so it's like really interesting, like, Gordian knot we got going on here.
And I'm pretty much against it across the board, but if I had to choose, I would say you're right. It's more acceptable for George Lucas on his own to say, I want to go back and make some changes to A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. I don't know if there's some changes in Empire. So make changes to those movies without studios' mandates. That's more acceptable than the studio or the corporation saying we're going to alter this thing.
Yeah. And like, to be fair,
think,
like I'll talk about Lucas mucking it up, and like everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about the bad things in the special editions, like the fucking on Mos Eisley when you got the fucking giant dinosaur thing just walking right in front of the shot, for an extended period of time, and that is so just kid in a candy store. That like, God, I shouldn't tell people to do this. There are videos on the YouTubes of me and my next door neighbor friend Drew and our other next door neighbor friend and Drew. Drew got a camera and an editing studio software. And so we made what could loosely be called films. And it's really just three idiots running around with a camera doing shit that they don't even understand. And then randomly his sister pops up in it because she wanted to be involved and we were all afraid of Drew's dad. These exist. Let's see here. I think I can't remember the name of the channel, but one of the videos is called Absolutely Cuckoo, and if you search Whirly, Wherle, I believe the channel's still up. So you can find these videos of me being just an absolute idiot with a fucking camera. And it is the exact same thing as George Lucas being an absolute idiot, but with CGI technology on a multi-million-dollar budget. It's like, ooh, look, we can do this. Isn't this cool? Isn't this awesome? Like, it's the exact same shit. It's the exact same mentality. So I totally understand it on a very elementary level, but I do get it. Mm-hmm. That being said, we all know the bad things in the special editions. Have you cared to go back and look at the original cuts and see all the... Because, like, you and I are about the same age, Ruben.
Yeah.
We grew up on the special editions. So, like, have you gone back and looked at some of the original cuts and seen the things that, like, really should have been fixed?
Well, that's interesting because while you and I are about the same age, I actually grew up on the original cuts because... I had it taped on a television with commercials and all, so I didn't even experience the new edits until within the last 5-ish years. And
okay, so you grew up on like Chimp Eye Emperor then?
On what?
Chimp Eye Emperor in episode 5?
Yeah, I guess so. And like you ask if I've gone back and seen those original cuts. I haven't because my VCR doesn't play VHS tapes anymore. I have one of those dual.
Don't have a very good VCR.
I don't. No, you're right. I have actually tried buying a new VCR. Well, not new for me. I've tried buying a used VCR and installing it just so that I can watch the original cuts because I found the pre-edits on VHS at my work. And so someday I'd like to go back and rewatch them. But like, so you're talking about I've seen the picture of like what the Emperor looked like in 1980 in Empire Strikes Back, and he doesn't look human, right?
Yeah, he's got like, what it was is like this, it was a fucking mess. They had like an actor and they digitally, or not digitally, they imposed, masked, that's the word, masked the eyes of a chimpanzee onto him. It's just a fucking shit show. It's one of the worst effects in the entire franchise, CGI flipping Yoda included. Like, it's god-awful, and of course they should have gone back and just put, what's his name, Ian McDiarmid in there. Of course they should have done that. I think I got his name right.
Yeah, I think so. See, looking at it right now, I'm literally looking at these pictures. It doesn't look good, but I'm okay with that. I like to go back and say, okay, the special effects are what they were in that time period, and I don't have to have the special effects of 2003 put onto a movie from 1980 because I can see, well, this is what you had to work with in 1980. So me personally, even if I can say, well, the special effects really aren't good, I don't need to suddenly have 20-year younger special effects thrown in to make it look better. That's just me. But other people, special effects are much more important to them, so I could see that they would be more okay with that edit.
Yeah, and there's some that I think actively help the film, like putting the actor of the Emperor in. And then there's some that I'm like, it doesn't necessarily have to be there, but I really don't mind it. And like, it was in the first edit, the 94, where they changed all the languages. Because originally in the original film, it's all in English. Like, on all the dials, it's all just in, plain English.
Yeah.
one of the edits, they go back and they change it to whatever the language in Star Wars, the basic language is, galactic basic or whatever. And like that's not a change that really affects the film, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of neat, and I don't mind a change like that.
I don't mind that either.
Yeah,
I just heard about. Oh,
like
go ahead.
They also went back and like changed the explosion that the Death Star has. So like in the original A New Hope, the Death Star just kind of blows up and it's pretty generic stock effect. And now like we have kind of the iconic image of the Death Star blowing up, where it blows up and there's like a ring that kind of blows out into space. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that, like stuff like that is fine to do. It's just it goes way too far because again he's a kid in a candy store. He can go back and do anything. And there's a great video essay that talks about it's kind of like a psychological breakdown of George Lucas as an artist, and says, you know, Star Wars was awful until the edit.
Oh, I just recently watched that video. Yeah.
Yeah.
Saved by the Edit.
Yeah, Saved by the Edit. Like, and George Lucas talks about that. Like, it was probably going to be a failure, except that he was able to save it in the edit, and so he's kind of always had this romantic connection to the ability to go back and keep tweaking and changing it. But then there's just shit with it where, like, it went too far. Like, we could talk Solo shooting first all day, but you know what's really stupid about that scene?
What?
He fucking bend. They like go in and use digital editing techniques to make Harrison Ford bend his neck to avoid the shot. And it just, like, when you really slow it down and look at it, it looks awful. It's just the fucking worst.
And I've never, well, you know, you can talk about that scene. Like, it's stupid for one reason, because, like, the whole, when Han shot Greedo unprovoked, like when he just shoots Greedo, and Greedo is just saying, like, you know, I'm going to turn you in even if I have to kill you. Like, Greedo is threatening him, but he's not, like, actually used any weapons or anything. That shows the character of Han Solo. And changing that scene in any way only, like, I don't know how to phrase it, but it makes Han less threatening, and I don't like that, because he was supposed to be kind of the maverick who would shoot a guy even if he's not in immediate danger. He would shoot a guy to save his own neck, and that was his character. And altering that scene changes his character, and so I don't like that. But also, that scene is really stupid because Greedo shoots at the wall. Like, he shoots a good 2 feet away from, and like, I haven't noticed him bending his neck, but like, he shoots and misses, and it's like, he shoots, and then like a second, and then Han shoots. Like, it's not like he was like, oh, in a gunfight or something where there was lots of gunfire going on. So I don't know.
It's ridiculous. So like, there's stuff like that, and I just want to make the wider point that, like, I feel like it's more acceptable when the artist wants to go back and do it, but I do feel like we're kind of tainted on it because of how, like, widely in popular culture the association is now to George Lucas doing it really poorly. I don't care what your Star Wars is. You look at the edits that Lucas made, and the vast majority of them are just bad. I don't think you can really make an argument for the vast majority of them. You really cannot convince me. Like, all right, you can say, oh, look, adding this ship from one of the recent Star Wars video games, leaving Mos Eisley, is really cool and makes the universe feel more together. And if it was just stuff like that, I'd be like, fine, because in the background, it doesn't really matter. When you fucking have a dinosaur walk straight in front of the frame for 30 seconds, it's a bad choice. Like you just wouldn't fucking do that in the movie. Like, if you were on set and you had a fucking dinosaur prop, you wouldn't have the thing on camera for 30 seconds in front of the shot. The shot wasn't framed to have a fucking dinosaur walk through the frame for a whole 30 seconds.
And they do that again earlier in the movie, before they even leave Mos Eisley, when the stormtroopers are out in the desert. There's like 10 or 15 seconds of stormtroopers riding on those other dinosaurs. And then finally you get to this part where the stormtrooper says, "Look, sir, droids." And it's like, you could have just cut to that. Like, you didn't have to have, like, "Hey, look at me, look what I can do now." And I don't know, it just feels, it would be like if I went back and found a homework assignment from 3rd grade, and then I took a red ink pen and changed my answers and went back and found my teacher and said, "Look, here's my homework, I deserve a better grade." Like, no, that's my homework from 3rd grade. If I made an F, then I made an F in 3rd grade. And I don't need 28-year-old me now saying, like, I'm better than that. Like, it shows a progression, I guess, is where I'm at on it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, I feel like, because you mentioned novels, and I feel like what you hear writers say a lot is writing is rewriting. No writer, or very few writers, are good on the first draft. And the ones that are the exceptions. But writing is rewriting is rewriting. And so the reason I don't think you see this mentality with novels and the like very often is because they've already gone back and touched it up. Stephen King's kind of, a notable exception, but typically, generally speaking, writers don't go back because they spent like 3 fucking years writing the book.
Yeah.
They don't want to go back and touch it anymore. They spent significant portions of their lives on things. Whereas film, there are always exceptions, but it's kind of rare for a movie to be worked on, to be in actual production, not pre-production, for more than a year or two. And even then, it's a big collaborative effort, so the concept of going back is extremely rare. So it's just it's a different kind of thing. So you'll hear a lot of bitterness and stuff from the Hollywood machine because so much of, quote unquote, the vision has to be compromised. Prime example from today is the whole demanding a Snyder cut of Justice League and all this shit. Like, that's gonna fix the fucking movie. But that's a thing. Director's cuts are a thing, and director's cuts that are very different from the theatrical release are a thing. And you know what? Most of the time, they're better.
It's at least interesting to see a different cut. You and I talked about this just a little bit a month or two ago. I was watching both of the theatrical Donner Superman films, and then I watched the Donner cut. And I think, with one exception of, there's one scene in a movie that I really liked. Other than that, I was like, and maybe it was because I had just watched Superman 2 the night before, and then I was watching the Donner cut, and I was sitting there saying, I don't really see much difference here. And you were saying, no, it's a better film. And so even if I get a director's cut of a movie and I say, okay, I didn't care for that, I think the difference there is I still have the other version if I don't like the director's cut. Like, you can get, 10 different cuts of Blade Runner, or however many cuts, and if you don't like this one, well, there's 9 other cuts you might enjoy. And I think why I don't like the George Lucas thing is that it's impossible to get the original cuts unless you're, more tech savvy than I am. Let me put it, it's impossible to legally get those cuts, because, like, I have the VHS tape from 20 years ago, and Disney has had Star Wars since 2014 and still hasn't re-released.
They're waiting for Lucas to die.
I mean, that must be it.
I'll be frank about it. They are waiting for Lucas to die.
And
like when Prince died and suddenly all his music was up for licensing because his family was waiting for him to die so they can start selling it, they're waiting for Lucas to die so Disney can release the original theatrical cuts. I'm telling you.
Yeah, and I
that's
don't.
Dark as shit, but that's what it is.
It is, and what's weird about it is they would make money now. Like, unless George Lucas specifically prohibited the release of those cuts when he sold Lucasfilms to Disney, like, you could make money by saying, okay, here's the theatrical cuts and here's the George Lucas cuts. People would buy both. Like,
Well,
there are people
that's
out
the thing,
there.
though. George Lucas is of the opinion that the special editions are better.
And
They're
but
not.
then no, they're not. But like, he could still have his special edition, and other people could too. Like, there's people who probably people our age who grew up on the special editions. They wouldn't care for the older version. They would say, "This is weird. Why isn't there a dinosaur walking in front of the frame in Mos Eisley?" Like,
Man, we are
and
gonna like harp on that one fucking shot, aren't we?
or who's this old guy? Why isn't Hayden Christensen here with Yoda and Obi-Wan? Like,
Oh
you
man.
know, and that's another one I don't like. But George Lucas could say, like, well, if you like this version, here you go. And if you like this version, here you go. Like, Disney would only stand a profit if they released both versions. And so, like, when you have, like, the director's cut of Daredevil and then the theatrical cut of Daredevil, I own them both. And, Fox, was it Fox or Sony that had...
It was Fox.
Okay. Like, they weren't, like, cutting off their own foot by releasing the director's cut. And so, even though that is... And that's actually, like, the director's cut thing is a weird example because, in theory, the director's cut is the original version. And then what we got initially is an alteration. But there, like, it's not like we're taking away a version to give us something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a really interesting thing to think about. And it's hard to talk about it in isolation because usually there's something else going on. Like, I really feel bad because we're just harping on Lucas, so I'll try not to bring him up too much more, but
Let me ask you about Steven Spielberg, because you mentioned him, and I'm not as familiar with his movies, period, but what did he do where he added special effects later?
oh, like a bunch of his sci-fi stuff, I'm pretty sure he did it. Yeah, E.T.'s kind of the infamous example where they replaced the guns with walkie-talkies.
Oh, okay, that was what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's like, dude, it's really, really blatant and just fucking weird. There's a bunch of other stuff that he did. It's more subtle for him, and so it's a little more acceptable. But like, a really famous one is, I want to say it's, which one is it? God damn it, it's because there's Nazis in 2 movies, and it's kind of annoying and hard to keep them separate.
For Indiana Jones?
Yeah, which is the one where he's fighting the Nazis on the trucks? And
Last Crusade.
Okay, so in that one, there's a scene where, like, a Nazi either drives the car or falls out of the car or whatever, off a cliff, and, like, the background for that effect was originally a matte painting done by hand.
Mm-hmm.
But Spielberg went back and had them make a digital matte instead of a physical matte painting and piece it in. And so it's much more subtle, but at the same time, someone fucking busted their ass on that goddamn matte painting.
Yeah.
Like, those things are a bitch.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And who is going to notice? Like, that's 3 seconds.
Fans were pretty pissed about it, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a big thing, and Spielberg actually kind of conceded to it. It was like, all right, fine, we'll put the original matte back in future releases. But yeah, you can get versions of Indiana Jones where it's got the digital matte, and like, so Spielberg's much more subtle and tasteful about it, with the exception of the fucking walkie-talkies.
I actually was looking at a picture of that. That's kind of hilarious. Like, I'm looking at it back and forth, and like, I mean, it's not like it's like, I don't know, it's not as in your face as some of the other stuff, but I just think it's funny that they're like, oh, we got to take guns out of this movie.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous.
Speaking of it, Spielberg and Indiana Jones, I don't know if you ever watched the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I remember just very little bits of it when I was younger. Like, I didn't watch it a ton like I did the movies, but apparently I was reading a few years ago, and so they may have already released these, but they were talking about doing re-releases of the series on DVD, but they were going to make alterations because the series was not historically accurate. And that makes me laugh because, of course, you're not going to have historical accuracy when you have a grave robber going and stealing the cup of Christ and, shooting lasers out of the Ark of the Covenant. Like, there's going to be a lack of historical accuracy there. But, like, to me, I don't want a more historically accurate version. I want to see what you originally put on screen.
Yeah,
And
it's a weird discussion though, as we talk about like releasing and re-releases and all this stuff. And what the point I was trying to make earlier is, you don't see this happen as much in other art forms than film, because just the opportunity to go back isn't as much there, and the idea of vision being compromised isn't as much there. Like, you know, there are novelists who hate their novels, but most novelists are pretty happy with the final results they turn in. They might think, oh, I just wasn't as good then as I am now or whatever, but by and large, novelists don't want to revisit it. Filmmakers, I feel, are a bit different because of how much of a collaboration it is, and because there is a lot more compromising of the vision, as it were. So I think the temptation to get to do the writing is rewriting mentality is there a lot more in film, but it's weird because there's already a finished result. Like, I'm sure we could go to George R. R. Martin's computer, if anyone knows how to run DOS. We could go to George R. R. Martin's computer and, like, read drafts of the first Game of Thrones book. But, like, that's not the version he released. That's not the version he would want us to read. And even if Spielberg wanted the version of E.T. with the fucking walkie-talkies, he wanted that to be the version that we all saw, but he released the version with guns. It's just fundamentally different because you didn't get to experience the first draft of Game of Thrones. You got to experience the final draft. And maybe there'd be something in you that like, if you read the first draft, you'd think, oh, this is such a better choice here. I like this more. I like this more. I like this more. But you didn't have that connection beforehand. So, like, if Martin released his original manuscript just, like, on a lark or part of a promotional thing for a new printing of the books or whatever, like, and like, this one comes with the original manuscript, untouched, unedited, and, like, you read that, it would be a different experience, even though you're going back and seeing something earlier. And,
yeah.
And so I feel like the thing here isn't so much the idea of the artist shouldn't be allowed to go back and touch their work. It's that the artist shouldn't be allowed to go back and touch their work after you've seen it. Have you heard about this project John Malkovich is on?
I don't think so.
It's like a weird promotional thing that they did with some like high-end liquor, where they store it for 100 years before they release the bottle, and so they shot a film, and it's not going to be released for 100 years, and it's got John Malkovich in it.
Yes, I have heard about that. I thought that was really weird.
Yeah, it's a very strange kind of promotional thing, but whatever works. So, like, you just got, like, that, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, man, what if it sucks? Like, you gotta know the director's gonna be, like, so fucking worried about, you know, future generations when they open that fucker up. He's probably gonna be long gone. Malkovich is pretty old as is, so he's definitely not gonna be around. What if they fucking open that thing up and it's like, everyone's just like, God, this movie is shit? Or like you know, like, times change, and what if this director lives like a really long time and times change, and he's just thinking, oh man, I had this whole scene in my movie that's like super problematic now. I don't want it released. What do I do?
Yeah.
There's just gonna be so much weird shit because now you've got a film that's really got time to be sat on, but now it can't be changed in all that time.
Yeah. And, you know, something that I think we should bring up, the difference between, like, a movie and a book. Like, George R. R. Martin is the only person behind Game of Thrones, the books. And, you know, with the movie, with the TV show, you know, there's lots of people, like, they're using his books pretty heavily, but, like, there's other people writing dialogue, there's people who are acting, there's people creating props. So if they were to re-release season 1 of Game of Thrones on Blu-ray and DVD, and they edited a prop. Well, like you mentioned earlier about the matte painting, somebody worked on that prop, and you're basically pissing all over their work. But like if George R. R. Martin re-released A Song of Ice and Fire, and he changed something, well, that's him altering his work. And so on the timeline of what I find more acceptable and less acceptable, I would find George R. R. Martin changing his own work to be more acceptable. But if you work on a TV show or a movie where there are countless people who are underappreciated and we don't even know their name, and their work is being altered after the fact, I find that kind of despicable. Like, not just, Star Wars, good chunk of it is just that I like the original version that I grew up with, and I kind of want to have that version again. So there's that, but then there's also like the people who worked on whatever part is getting like, I don't know if the actor Brandon Shaw is still alive, but like that's really disrespectful to just completely remove him from that scene in Return of the Jedi. And like, I don't know, like I feel like it's just, George Lucas, when he makes those edits like that, and I know we said we would try to lay off of him, but like, it seems like he's saying like all these other people are just interchangeable parts, and this is all my vision, and everyone must bow down to me so I can do whatever I want to do, even if it means I'm taking you out of the movie or whatever.
Mm-hmm. No, it is the most collaborative art form
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about film, and so it's just, I don't know, it's weird. It's just weird to think about removing someone's work, and I don't know, I think part of it here is also the notion of, I don't know if legacy is the right word. Permanence? Permanence is a good word. A film is permanent, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
even George Lucas, if he could, I'm sure would go to everyone's house and rip up every copy of the original trilogy that he could. But he just can't. Like, there permanently will be versions of low quality, but versions nonetheless of the original Star Wars trilogy. But then there's other art forms that are, by their nature, temporary, and so by definition, they can't be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mentioned the whole Shakespeare example earlier, and you can change the script of a play, but you can't change the experience of a play.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you think about going to a stage show, you're never seeing the same performance twice. Interesting example, I believe it was last year we did a review for History Month on Allegiance, the George Takei musical that was based, or at least it was about and slightly based on.
Hey, I lost you for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I back now?
The last thing, yeah, you're back. The last thing I heard was when you did a stage show.
Yeah, okay. Well, like, so a stage show is never the same. So, like, we did a review of Allegiance, which is partially based on George Takei's own experiences, but just generally about the Japanese internment camps in World War II. And it's interesting because I saw one version of, it's the same actors, it's all the same cast, it's the same script. I saw one version of the show in theaters at using the whole Fathom Events thing, and then I saw another version of the show on bootleg, someone recording it in the audience, because I wanted to rewatch it, and the Fathom event was never released on DVD or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw two different versions of a show, and it's all the same show, except that it's not. Like, if there's a 3-day run of a play, and you go to all three, you're experiencing 3 different plays.
Yeah.
Like, doesn't matter what changes, because, like, fucking theater's live, things go wrong. I remember I went to a play at the local civic theater here, and they had a very, very small wheeled on stage, or wheeled on set for a scene. It was just kind of like on casters on a little 5x9 platform. They wheeled it on, they wheeled it off. When it was wheeled off, a chair that was on it fell off and just fell on the middle of the stage, and they had to contrive a way to get the chair out of there as fast as they could. And like that's just part of things going wrong on stage. It's just part of the art form, and the temporary nature, the fact that it is live, that every performance is different, changes the art form, and changes the experience, because it doesn't matter how well the actors handled that. It's taking you out of the play to a degree. You know, actors forget lines on stage, and their co-stars have to, kind of try to jog their memory by improvising a line and trying to cue them in on what their next line should be. You know? It changes the presentation, which, like, so it doesn't, like, you can't ever go back and change a play, but you can go back and change a movie. And sure, it's not the same movie, but like you can go back and add something that no one will ever know about unless you tell them. And sure, it's a different movie, except it's not. So stuff like that, I don't know, it's just interesting.
Can you think of any examples in comic books where this has been done? Where, like, because this is a classic where, like, comics come out weekly and monthly, you know, every week new comics are out at your store, and then 6 months later, those same comics are being collected in book form. And I can think of at least one example of where, like, a comic came out, and then by the time it was put out in trades, it was changed slightly. And, like, you know, Batman Damned is a good example. But, like, I feel like that's kind of, and that's a situation where I'm not sure, like, when the New 52 first started, there was a website that it was called DC Comics has done blank. It's been blank number of days since DC Comics has done something stupid, and a lot of it was like
a good name for a website.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird, like and it was like attached to like a comic book news site, like, but they, like, a lot of the stuff that they were resetting to counter for was like, you know, DC is, it wasn't like, you know, oh, we don't like that they retcon this character's history or something like that. It was more problematic stuff, and like they were doing a lot of stuff where it seemed to me there wasn't a lot of good communication between the company and the creators, and then like like where creators were getting treated kind of poorly or something like that. And I mentioned earlier about how with the movie, when you go back and like create a digital background for, you know, the movie, you're kind of screwing over whoever worked on that matte painting. I remember with, I think, Batwoman with the New 52, she's talking to, and I haven't read the story, so I may be misremembering which comic book it was, but where Kate Kane is talking to her niece, and her niece mentions that she was part of the Teen Titans at one point. And then, you know, the New 52 is kind of infamous when they first started off, like, they didn't have their backstory worked out just yet. So there was a lot of inconsistencies and, like, incongruities, if you will. And then later it was revealed, oh, wait, she wasn't actually part of the Teen Titans. And so when you buy the trade paperback, they actually removed that line of dialogue. And to me, I would rather have the inconsistencies, just have the original experience that everyone had reading the monthlies, have it warts and all, even if it flies in the face of what someone else was doing in Teen Titans. I would rather have that than have you trying to fix it on the fly in later trade reprintings.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you mentioned Batman Damned, and that is definitely a case of censorship. Whereas there's another very recent example, and I talked about it with Vac on the monthly comic roundup last time, and I talked about it also on comic reviews when I was reviewing the issue. In one of Bendis's issues on Superman, or maybe it's Action, one of the two, a gangster calls one of his underlings autistic as an insult. It's like, what's wrong with you, you fucking autistic, or something like that. He uses it in a derogatory way.
Mm-hmm.
And Bendis got a lot of heat for that. Like, someone that is in the comics community or in some way or another says, I can't believe, as the parent of an autistic child, that this was published and got through editorial. Uh, and like he's like, Brian Michael Bendis, I cannot believe you did this. And Bendis is like, no, I was using it as like to show this guy was a jerk, and he immediately gets comeuppance from it. And it sparked a whole conversation about how, yeah, it's fine to have a character use something and give them comeuppance, but his comeuppance has nothing to do with the fact that he's insulting the autistic community there. It's just, he just randomly dies, and you used a bad word so that we'd know, oh, bad guy, it's okay, he died. No, like, that's not okay. And so, future printings of this story, he's not going to say the word autistic. And Bendis came out and apologized and everything. And so, you know, I'm not going to, like... I think Bendis is a smart enough writer. He knows what he was doing, and he kind of realized he stepped in it. It's whatever. It's a little annoying, but I don't think it makes him a bad person or whatever. So I don't mind him not wanting to have to fucking fight this battle for years to come, and want him to have to explain this over and over again. Yeah, you kind of fucked up, and you want to make the change in future versions. That's fine with me.
And I'm kind of torn on that one, because on the one hand, I don't want somebody who is autistic to read that and feel like that being autistic is a problem. I don't want them to have that experience. But on the other hand, I want to see, like, you can go back and look at, I was reading a Marvel team-up comic, I think, where somebody, I think they were talking to either Robbie Robertson or his son in a Spider-Man story, and they used a racial slur, and obviously they were a bad person. It wasn't like it was Jonah, J. Jonah Jameson calling Robbie something. It was like a bad guy, and the point was, hey, racism is bad. And like, you and I were talking about this a little bit before we were recording. Like, there are racial slurs that they're in a comic book where it's specifically saying this is a bad thing, do not say it, but it uses the word, and it wouldn't fly today. You wouldn't be able to put it in a book today. And I kind of like seeing the growth of us as a society. Like, back then, this is all the horrible stuff that they got away with, and in some cases they were doing it to prove a point. And nowadays, like, look how far we've come, for better or worse. And so I think it's good that we're getting rid of that word in that Superman comic, because, like I said, like, I would really hate it if, like, an autistic child was reading that and then felt like, oh, it's like they're being degraded. That would be really awful.
Just 1 sec to go grab a book real quick.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I cite this properly. So I'll just entertain the folks.
So I'm drinking out of a Darth Vader mug right now. And it says, I am your father. Ian may edit all this later, but if he doesn't.
So I'm back, and I have the book. Now I just got to find the panel, which is always the hard part. Oh, man. Okay. So this is all the Apple shit. Oh, wait. Does he come back in Volume 2, or is it still in Volume 1? Shit, that's hard to remember. Alright, so I've got Batman No Man's Land here.
Oh, yeah.
The first volume of it. And, like, alright, so No Man's Land for me was the comic that I read for the first time, where I was like, it was the first event comic I ever read proper, right? This is, like, kind of what got me into more mainstream comic books as opposed to just big standalone issues. And I have, fond memories of it and all that jazz. So, like, then I did a review of the No Man's Land series that took me, like, a long time to get through. Oh, good, I found the page. Took me a long time to get through, but, like, the first volume of No Man's Land proper has this line that, like, I mean, it hurt to read Batman saying, and it's clearly just an example of the writer at the time hadn't really thought of it, and they just didn't think to clean it up. So this is Batman realizing the people that are left in Gotham post No Man's Land, because he thinks that he can kind of just tell people, all right, go back to your lives, and they'll be fine now that they're under his protection. But then he has this realization. Now I realize who these people are. The destitute, former welfare recipients, the quote-unquote intellectually challenged, the unmotivated.
Hmm.
The people with common sense would never have tolerated Scarface's regime. They left this neighborhood weeks ago. That is just... So, like, the destitute, homeless, former welfare recipients, the intellectually challenged, so retards, and the unmotivated. Like, fuck Batman in that scene. It's just like a shitty thing to read Batman. And it's not like he's saying it, which is, like, bad in its own right. He's physically speaking it. And I would be happy to change that line because it makes me just cringe when I read shit like that in a comic I like.
And was your copy of the trade, was it the really thick one with the like the red and black stripes, or was the
Yeah,
one
yeah,
with
yeah.
the okay? Because there's other trades that are, so that's probably in mine also. I was just gonna say I'm gonna later after we record I'll double check, but that's yeah, and it's one of those things like I feel like they were trying to walk on eggshells when they had him, instead of just having him say like, the R word. And I'm even uncomfortable saying that, like, even though I don't think of that as an insult, it's kind of been appropriated into being an insult, and so I don't like saying it. But I feel like them saying like, well, we're not going to have him say the R word, so we'll have him say this instead, and it still comes off as really icky.
I mean, like, welfare recipients, like, just, that's such a, like, mark on the poor. And
Hmm.
I'm just like, no, that's not Batman. I hate it. And so it's just like, it's this little one-off moment in what otherwise is actually a really good issue. And so it's just like, it's just this idea of internalized bigotry, internalized prejudice. And, the crazy thing is, like, it ain't... I'll just go to racism because it's easiest to explain there. The thing you'll hear a lot of people say is, I can't be racist, I have black friends. That's true. You have black friends. Doesn't mean you've escaped the prejudice inherent within society
Hmm.
towards other races. Like, it's a really hard leap for people to make. You can still be racist on a societal level without taking it to a person-to-person level.
Hmm.
So, like, what that scene is an example of is just the society at the time. This is early 2000s, late 90s. They just didn't think of that as a bad thing to have Batman say.
Hmm.
Like, the sensitivity toward the poor, toward people with intellectual disabilities, they just didn't think of that as a bad thing to say. And it's a symptom of the time. Just like if you go back and read old World War II comics, you'll see Batman saying some shit about, like, Asians and whatnot because, war propaganda.
Hmm.
That's just the shit it was. And so, like, part of me that likes this comic wants them to go back and change that fucking dialogue box, but at the same time, you are changing the art form, you're changing history in a way to try to save face there.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, so I might be more comfortable with it here, but what I definitely wouldn't be comfortable with is if someone were to go back and change those old wartime propaganda comics where Batman and Superman are beating up Japanese people drawn like rats. And it's
Right.
not because I find that, compelling or good to show. No, of course not. But at that point, you're changing the narrative. You're physically changing history. And so when you change things like this, you are changing history. So, like, to try to balance that in my head, and this might be just plain out inconsistent, I don't know. But to try to balance that in my head, I kind of just want to say you have, like, a 5-year grace period to change work like that. Does that sound fair? Is that unreasonable? Like, you have a
No.
5-year grace period to realize, okay, actually, this was kind of a shitty thing for me to have said or done.
No, I don't think that's I think that makes sense, especially like with the Bendis thing. He even came out and apologized and said I shouldn't have done it. It was wrong. And so any changes with reprints has his blessing. But with those old Batman comics from 1939, everyone involved is dead, and none of the you have none of their blessing if they decided to say we're going to reprint this issue so that it's drawn slightly differently, or so that the coloring or whatever, like if you're doing it with some kind of like it's insensitive. Well, yeah, it was, but like I was saying earlier, like look how far we've come. Like you don't see minorities drawn like that now. Like if you look at a Batman comic from 1940, like anyone of color is drawn in a very negative light. But look at now, and not that racism is gone, but we've come a long way. And I would love to go back and look at those Batman comics and say it's really awesome that it's not as bad as it is here.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and so it's stuff like that. Like what's also interesting is you might actually have those guys' blessings, because like a lot of those guys felt like, particularly the artists, felt really bad for years after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
That they did draw stuff like that, but it was the only way they could make a buck at the time.
Yeah.
So you might have their blessing, but I still don't want you to change it, because you're erasing history. And of course, like Disney and Warner Brothers have just a history of trying to cover this shit up. You ever heard of what's her name, Little Coal Black? I think that's what she's called. It's
don't.
It's a fucking super racist, stereotypical cartoon parody of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, done by Warner Brothers. With what's the name of that art style? It's like really, really racist depictions of black people with like the big lips and everything. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Coal Black and the Seven Dwarves.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. So it's like, it's super fucking racist. And
Yeah.
like, it's just, yeah, you look at the art, you look at the, like, you can watch the, like, shitty bootlegs of the cartoon, and you just see it. It's all over the place. And so, like, these big companies have a history of trying to cover this stuff up, and I'm like, no, you did it. Own it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously I don't want you selling it, but you should make it public domain, and just so it's, like, you recognize your own history, because the fact that you're trying to cover it up says that you didn't, like, learn anything except that you shouldn't do that shit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not showing that you're taking ownership of the mistake, you're just trying to hide the mistake. It's the equivalent of the kid sweeping shit under his bed and saying, "Hey mom, I cleaned my room."
Yeah.
By the way, I was the kid that did that shit.
I just threw, and to this day, I just throw stuff in my closet. Like that's my version of cleaning up. Yeah, Disney. And I don't want to say it wasn't Disney, I don't think, but there was some studio that said like, okay, some of these cartoons. It was, I want to say maybe Warner Brothers was like, some of these cartoons are distasteful now, but we're presenting them as they were presented then. But we understand this is wrong, and we should not have done it then.
Yeah, that was Warner Brothers with some of their Looney Tunes cartoons.
Okay,
they've still purposefully suppressed a lot of their like really, really disturbing stuff.
Oh, okay. But at least that's a step in the right direction.
Oh no, definitely. Like I don't know, I was browsing the old YouTube, and I came across an old war cartoon that was like, it was done with what's Mel Blanc. It was done with Mel Blanc voicing some of the characters. It was seriously right out of Looney Tunes, just with all original characters for wartime propaganda about not trying to sneak messages past the war censor, because you'll get your buddies killed. And they do it, it's very cartoony. Like, he at one point tries to throw a paper airplane out of a moving train at someone to mail this letter for him, and like a fucking, those classic like Acme arms comes out of the train, grabs the paper airplane and out of the air and all that stuff. It's the censor. Their reach is far and wide, all that shit. It's like, on one level that's funny, And then on another level, the comeuppance of him finally getting a letter through comes through, and the news of the planned attack gets to the Japanese front. And let me tell you, whoo! The second they start doing a Japanese character, I don't care that I got a laugh out of all the silliness of this guy trying to get stuff past the censors. The Japanese character, it's hard to fucking watch.
Mm-hmm.
It's like at that point I just had to go, oh, I was kind of enjoying this, and then I had to turn it off.
Yeah.
It's just hard to watch that stuff, and so yeah, there comes a point where you're changing history when you go back to try to update art, and in any form, but I think film and animation as an extension of film are really the most obvious where this is attempted to be done with, because of their permanent quote unquote nature. So I don't know. It's a really weird thing to think about.
Yeah. And I think that with stuff like that, like, you know, with a lot of these older stuff from like the 30s and 40s, a lot of that is getting into the public domain. So it's almost a moot point, like something that's from that time period. Well, you know, it's you have the original version and it's not for sale. You can just watch it on YouTube or whatever. But then it's still very telling when the company is like, no, like that didn't happen. We didn't do that. This is what, you know, we did. We weren't racist back then. See, and so it's still very like, oh, okay, like that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just trying to save face. And you know what? The way you can tell apologies are genuine is when people own up to the mistake. You know, you catch someone like stealing from you or whatever, and let's be of the opinion that you're open to redemption and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you think has redeemed themselves? The person that steals from you but then admits it and you know, pays penance for it, gives the money back, pays you back something more, whatever, pays penance for it, admits and owns up to the mistake, or the person who says, yeah, I'm sorry that happened, it's not going to happen again, listen to all these things that were surrounding why it happened. Like, there's a distinction there between actively improving the situation and offering excuses. There's a distinction. Like, there's actual redemption, then there's attempts to save face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's connected to the wider topic here of you know, modifying art, but that's definitely one of the reasons that people do it.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's interesting.
I'm trying. So you're coming down on, in some cases, it's more acceptable. I think we both agree it's more acceptable for the artist or the creator to edit their work than a company or corporation going in and doing and censoring it. And it's more acceptable to do it soon after the fact, like especially if you did something and you say, hey, I shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have done that or whatever. To like go in and change it soon than it is to, like, you know, 20 years later to try and like do it. And in some cases, do it just for financial reasons. So would you say that that's accurate?
You know, like, I definitely feel that's definitely been the tone of the conversation, but as soon as you try to pin it down like that for me, I immediately think of Alan Moore.
Okay.
And Alan Moore is someone who, like, Alan Moore has come out and said, I never should have been allowed to paralyze Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke. And if I wrote it today, I wouldn't do that. And I can't help but feel like in some miracle situation, Alan Moore comes back and wants to do a rewrite of The Killing Joke or whatever, wants to sign off on a new edition, and he wants to change it and get Brian Bolland on board. But in this version, he doesn't allow the Joker to paralyze and sexually assault Barbara Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't want Alan Moore to do that. I don't. Like, I understand that the assault on Barbara Gordon is kind of a controversial issue in this day and age, and we can have that discussion. It adds to the piece. it's an important part of the piece. I don't want that changed. And I'm sure he would if he could or had the motivation to. And I don't want that to change because it's such an important part of the piece. So, like, yeah, and I mean, he doesn't meet my 5 years later rule or whatever, but still, I don't know, like, I guess it depends for me on how massive the change is, where the change is coming from, how tastefully it's done, to harp on Lucas again. Just there's so many factors that I don't think I can give too many of a general consensus on where I come down for it. It really comes down to case by case for me.
Yeah, and that's probably wise, like in a thing like this, like to have just a set rule, like you can never do it, like then there's always going to be something like, well, what about that one thing? And it's like, oh yeah, well that's different. I had not heard that he regretted that, and I hate to say it, like I read The Killing Joke back when I was a teenager, like 13, and I never really thought about, wow, that's kind of like a horrible thing that, like, I knew it was a horrible thing that happened to the character, but I never thought about how, like, this is a horrible thing that happened to a woman. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it never really occurred to me until much more recently, like when the animated movie came out and people were talking about how they didn't like The Killing Joke, and I was like, wow, this is news to me. I thought everyone loved this story. And so it was a new light being shined on that story. And I will even controversially say I'm kind of glad that the story happened the way it did, because I like the character of Oracle as she was in the late 80s, all throughout the 90s. I like that character. I don't think
miss Oracle quite a bit in the New 52 and Rebirth stuff. Even when I like what people are doing with Barbara Gordon and like trying to make her more techie so she could both be Batgirl and kind of like Oracle, it's not the same. And
yeah.
Part of that's probably nostalgia glasses. I don't know. It's just not the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. And certainly, like, not to talk too much about Killing Joke, but that wasn't the intention with Killing Joke. It's not like Alan Moore had a plan for Barbara Gordon to become Oracle. No, she's injured and assaulted as a way to get at Batman, and there's sexism tied up within that. But you know what? It's still a really very, very powerful character motivating thing. Yeah, it's hurting a woman in order to motivate a man and all that stuff. I'm not going to deny that exists. It's still really powerful within the story itself.
Yeah.
That's just how I come down on it. I remember reading that and going, fuck. That's all I'm like. I remember reading that and just being blown away and scared and realizing the scale of this. And so you can talk about the wider issues of it, but when it gets right down to it, in the context of the story, you cannot argue that it doesn't work to do what it's meant to. So that's just, it's just one of those things. It's a really, really intricate discussion. But yeah, I do like Oracle a lot more than I've ever liked Barbara Gordon anywhere else. And it's kind of unfortunate that, like, I don't know. To be fair, they're going to put Stephanie Brown as Batgirl, and I love Grant Morrison, but I don't love that idea, and yeah, Stephanie Brown's better off dead, and Oracle's better off as Oracle and not Batgirl. So there's my controversial opinions right there. Give me Cassandra Cain, Batgirl, Oracle, and Stephanie Brown dead in the ground.
I like Cassandra Cain.
Yeah, same. So there's my controversial Batgirl opinions for the night.
We've all got controversial Batgirl opinions, I think. Each one.
Yeah. And I'm certain a lot of that's just wrapped up in how I read them, and I can probably hear an argument, but I'm not going to agree with it because I'm right and you're wrong, and that's all there is to be said. But no, it's so weird to talk about it in regards to, like, the distinction between censorship, between authorial intent, between audience acceptance, between changing times. There's a lot of dimensions to the idea of retouching art. Title retouching art. Yep. I have to put George Lucas in the fucking thumbnail. I don't know what else is going to be in there, but it's going to be George Lucas. We'll see. You'll already see the thumbnail, folks. You can tell me what I put in there. Or what I should have put in there.
George Lucas holding a walkie-talkie.
Just like a giant-ass walkie-talkie. That, like, takes up the whole fucking thumbnail.
Uh-huh.
It's got, like, a T-Rex head. Oh, that'd be good. Oh, man. Yeah, I don't know. It's a whole fucking thing. There's a lot of dimensions to this, though, and they all kind of touch together, and one kind of informs the other, and it goes on and on and on. I will say I don't think there is, like, to wrap back to the general sense, I don't think there is a general sense. I hear a lot of people say, like, oh, you should never go back and retouch art, and I've heard, like, arguments for it, like, Jackson Pollock, would smoke while he painted, and so occasionally his cigarette ash would just get in the painting, and he wouldn't take it out, and someone, like, made the example, like, what if Jackson Pollock, like, came and was like, oh shit, I got some cigarette ash in that painting, let me just brush that off, and people were like, no, it's what makes the whole piece, and everything, and it's just like, yeah, you wouldn't want that, and so therefore we should never retouch art. I'm like, no. Mm-hmm. I think there are occasions, and that's kind of where I come down to it. It's a case by case basis for me. I don't see any way to argue never do it or do it all the time whenever the author wants to or whatever. I think it's got to be case by case.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think I have anything else to say about it.
Okay, that was fun. So then I need to come up with a review topic for us, don't I?
I believe so.
Now's usually the time that I start, like, looking around the room to find something, but now my room's set up, or at least the way I'm recording right now, I'm just, like, looking at my kitchen, and I don't know what we could review in my kitchen, so...
We're gonna review a spatula. It's the best spatula.
Yes, what shall we discuss? Horror month is next month, as I clearly remembered. This is not being changed after the fact. No. So yeah, we do horror movie reviews all through the month of October. What would be a good horror movie to review? Oh, okay, I know what we're doing. This will be fun. This is a movie that will probably be oddly topical and very uncomfortable and will fit with the Geeky Gentleman theme of, for some reason, we always talk about something related to body horror, particularly related to sex.
Oh, no.
We're going to review Teeth.
Oh, no. I've heard of this movie. I've never seen it.
Yeah? This will be great. All right. So, yes, next week we start Horror Month, and we'll be reviewing Teeth. There we go. A totally genuine and not redacted retouch of this episode's conclusion. And now back to your regularly scheduled conclusion. Everyone, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I'm Philosopher.
Right. And I'm the Comics Kid 2099.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.